But was he? I don't know. Was your dad politically active?
Hmm?
Was my granddad politically active? Or just a soldier?
He was a regular soldier before the First World War. He was in the regular army. He was in King's Royal Rifle Corps.
But where did the politics come from?
What politics?
When did you get involved in politics?
In Bournemouth, when I was 16 and could join a trade union. You weren't allowed to join before you were 16. I started work at 14, but you weren't allowed to join the union until you were 16. And I was an apprentice, and apprentices weren't allowed to go on strike. So if there was a strike, you had to work. And at the same time, I joined the Labour Party, the 1st of May 1936. And after 3 days, I left the Labour Party and joined the Communist Party because I realised the Labour Party wasn't doing anything.
Yeah, but why? I mean, where did it come from? I don't understand.
Well, my father was unemployed for 5 years, and I think the experience of unemployment and deprivation and poverty and that sort of thing. And then when we moved to Bournemouth, to see people so rich in comparison with people so poor made us think that there was something totally wrong with society.
Not just you, or Granddad as well?
No, he didn't take an active part. He tried to solve the problems that he had in his way. And he'd do anything to sort of feed the family and get work and things like that. And he did get work eventually in Bournemouth, but extremely poorly paid. He worked for the Royal Bath Hotel, looking after the silver, and he got 25 shillings a week for it. But he used to bring food home, because in the Royal Bath, if working in the kitchen, somebody ordered a roast chicken or something like that, and then they didn't touch it and it came back down, it had to be thrown away in the swill. But the people there were all very poor working, and if they possibly could, they'd take it home. And my father was amongst those that brought things home. Chicken and meat, food that we needed. And one day he bought champagne home, and we all said we didn't like that fizzy lemonade. That was part of it. And then eventually he got a job working for British School of Motoring in the office, because he'd lost his leg in the First World War, and that made him, he was very, very, lots of guts. He even learned how to ride a bike with one leg, you know, by having a special, well, he had a strap that he put on his, so that he could pedal with one foot, and took the pedal off the other side so that he could use it, and he used to get around that way. And that was a good job, but it was a franchise, was British School of Motoring, and the man that employed him was a very good man. He was well educated, and eventually he went bust, and British School of Motoring just handed the franchise over to somebody else, and he joined the army as some way of making a living as a guardsman, ordinary guardsman. He didn't get in as an officer because he didn't have the money to afford it. And in the guards they were called gentlemen guardsmen because they were really officer types, but they couldn't afford to be officers. So that's what happened to him. And at that time we were very politically active, supporting Spain. And
bang on, get back, but I still don't understand why you joined the Communist Party, though, because
me?
one that's poor doesn't join the Communist Party, otherwise it'd be big.
Well, I wasn't poor. I was interested in politics, and I thought socialism was the answer.
But where did that come from then?
I don't know,
It wasn't from your dad.
by experience and
It wasn't
observation.
from your dad though.
No, not from
Or
my
from your
parents.
mum?
My mum was very true blue. She believed in all the establishment and the rich must be rich because they were clever, that sort of thing.
First World War, did he at all?
Well, he did very occasionally, very little. And I think it must have been so awful that he. No, I think he tried to forget it more than anything. I know he once went to see the film All Quiet on the Western Front and had to leave halfway through. It was too realistic, and I can understand it, because films they're laughable now to me because they're not realistic. But as I told you, that Finnish one was one that got me because it was realistic. Most of the others aren't. And how can you make war films realistic?
All Quiet on the Western Front was fairly realistic.
Very, very good indeed. Very realistic. Because you can understand them and there's reality in it. But I mean, I don't
What did he
think...
think about the war? Did he ever think what he actually thought about it? Did he have any politics about the First World War?
No, the thing that dominated him with the army was the comradeship that he had with the others in the battalion. And it was a very close battalion, and it was a very proud battalion. And King's Royal Rifle Corps, like lots of the army, they had their officers sort of put a lot into it, financially in peacetime, They were very proud of the fact that they had a 60 bugle band, 60 silver bugle band, things like that. And apparently they were a very, very proud regiment. And they're a famous regiment, they were quite well known.
Really was interested in politics, or he never thought
Yes,
about the First World War?
he was progressive and supported the left all the time. And
Was he politically active at all? Did he go on
No, he
demonstrations?
didn't. He didn't do anything active at all. He came back one day in Bournemouth and he said he'd been to a meeting. Anyway, it must have been a communist meeting or something. I don't know. I was young at the time. And he went to this meeting and he said, and this bloke gave a talk, and he said that money ought to be abolished, you see. And he said, and then they took a collection. He thought that was funny. But there it was. No, Dad was, he was very progressive.
So why did he call you so many names?
Well, he was in the regular army in 1908 and went to India, was in India with the King's Royal Rifle Corps. And in 1914 they brought them back from India, from the heat of India, and put them into the Somme, not the Somme, into the first battle of the First World War. What were they? They called them the... they were famous. They called them the contemptible little army that stopped the Germans in Belgium. And he was there. And of course, coming from India into the cold and the wet of France, a lot of them got ill, rather than wounded, but they'd stopped the Germans, and it was famous for the rapid British rifle fire that was so fast that the Germans thought they were machine guns. Anyway, he was in France for 3 years before he got he got leave and went home on leave, and whilst he was on leave his battalion went into action and had severe losses. And when he came back they'd amalgamated with another battalion, so he went back to another battalion, and they asked him when did he have leave, and he said leave, never had any leave. He went back on leave again for another fortnight. So anyway, when he came back, they were back in the line, and they asked for volunteers for wiring duty, you know, for putting up barbed wire and things like that. And he felt that he'd had 2 lots of leave, he owed them something, he volunteered. And then I think the sergeant got killed and the corporal got killed, and then he took over, and then he got shot through the knee and crawled back to the trench. And the sergeant said, you know, he said, well, hang on, George, I'll go and get a shell dressing for that, and we'll bandage it up. Went into the dugout to get shell dressing, and a shell hit the dugout, and the sergeant was killed. So he then went on and crawled to the reserve trench farther back. And by then, of course, he'd been crawling through the mud with the wounded knee, and of course went off to hospital, but gangrene had set in and he lost his left leg. And funny enough, the hospital he ended up in was where he'd come from, in Preston, in Fulwood. And he, as soon as he got better and he'd given him an artificial leg, he stayed in the army and sort of became a clerk in the army. He didn't like leaving the army, he was very fond of the army. But eventually he became a civilian clerk, and then of course they reduced and he lost his job. So that was it.
He lost his job. When did he lose his job?
Well, he lost his job with the army and went and worked for Leyland Motor Works. And he was a clerk with Leyland Motors. And in 1931, or when the slump started, he lost his job then with Leyland when they cut staff. And he used to say it was because he had a pension, because he had lost his leg. People said, oh, well, he can afford to do without a job, he's got a pension, that sort of attitude. And it made it very hard. I think he was about 5 years unemployed. And at that time I was at Preston Grammar School, and my mother said, because of him being unable to get a job, terrible unemployment in those days, she said, if we got a bloody starve, we may as well go somewhere decent and starve, and they moved to Bournemouth. So that's how that happened.
My mum's side of the family, do you know what?
Oh, your mum's side, yes. Well, I was thinking, my mother's side, she was one of 18 children, and they were in a big estate outside Preston. My grandfather was he was a very good carpenter and joiner and furniture maker, and worked for the estate. And the grandmother, I don't know, she must have been cook and housekeeper and things like that. And they brought up the whole children on there. And they went all over the world. The children, you know, one of them was a Mountie and another one in Australia. You know, they disappeared all over the place. But on Mum's side, her mother was very strong in the labour movement, cooperative movement. And I liked her immensely. But she committed suicide, actually.
Yeah.
You knew about that, I think.
Well, what did she do? What things was she involved in then?
Oh, mother's?
Well, my grandmother.
Your grandmother? Well, she was in the cooperative movement, the Labour Party, and quite active, you know, on the women's movement generally.
Was she a suffragette?
I don't think so, not in that area. But they remember supporting hunger marches and things like that. They had a strong activity within the Bristol region, what they were doing. And
during the First World War, were they doing anything?
They were helping pacifists and people who were against the war during the First World War. They were definitely involved in that.
Do you know how they helped them and things?
Yeah, by hiding them from being caught by the police, that sort of thing. And there was not much you could do. They didn't have a very good time. And I think it put an end to my education because I thought in Bournemouth, permanent holiday by the seaside, by the education. And I was 13 at the time, and after my 14th birthday, we had to learn a poem about, I forget what it is, I know, but if you didn't learn your poem and able to recite it, you used to get the cane. It was a very good system they had in those days, you know. Knock hell out of you if you didn't do as you were told. And I thought, well, I'll never master this poem, because what happened, I forget who it's by, but it's the one about the revenge of the fleet, and the poem goes, "Was Flores in the Azores, Sir Richard Grenville lay. Spanish ships of war at sea, we have sighted 53. Shall we fight or shall we flee?" And I thought, a good time to bugger off whilst you got a chance. But I never got any farther with the poem, and I never have since. But when I went back to school, suddenly I realised I was 14. I could leave school. So that was it. I thought, bugger the poem, I'll leave school. So I left school. And then I went to an employment agent, or not, youth employment officer, something like that. And he said, what did you want to do? So I said, well, I want to be a printer. So he said, you want to be a printer what? And I thought, well, I said, you know, a compositor. You know, a printer, a compositor. And I thought, poor bugger doesn't seem to understand. So anyway, he said, oh yes, a compositor what? And suddenly I realised he wanted me to say, sir. And I thought, well, you're supposed to be helping me. If you want to be called sir, say you want to be called sir. Don't play about that. Yes. So anyway, I didn't get on well with him, and he sent me off to a toy factory in Boscombe. And I had to cut jigsaw puzzles. I did it for about 3.5 months. And I could do one today, I think. You know, it's imprinted on the design on my mind. Anyway, then my father met somebody who said he could get me an apprenticeship with a religious printer, you see. And I didn't like the idea myself, but I thought, well, at least it's an apprenticeship and I'm getting out of this toy factory. And so I went to work for this printing company, and it was awful. They might have been religious and so on, but they weren't very good in their attitude, and they were always bullying me, and you know, it made my life misery. And one day they were after me when the boss was out, and I ran out of the factory and shut the door and bolted it so they couldn't get out. And then I thought they'd get out the window, so I nailed up the window as well, you see, so they couldn't get out. And then I thought, well, I'll go home. I went home. And when I got next day, I suddenly realised what I'd done. So I didn't go back to work. I went to this other printing works that everybody said was a terrible company. They printed betting slips and football coupons and things like that, you know. And I used to look at it, and it looked a proper factory to me, and it looked like a printing works to me. And I went to see the manager, which I'd done several times before. And he said, I've come to the conclusion, the only way I can stop seeing you is to give you a job. So he asked me what I could do, and I told a few lies. And he said, oh, I could start then, but I had to get a reference. And I said, oh no, I can't get a reference. And so he said, why can't you get a reference then? And I explained what I'd done, and he was very amused and seemed to think it's funny, but I didn't. So he said, well, you must go back and get your cards at least. And that's how I started there. So the following Monday I started work at this proper printing works that I thought, and it was a proper one, it was good. And they handed me over to a man he looked even worse than the others that I'd just left. And he was sort of swarthy, tough looking, and tall, and swore in between words, in the middle of words when he could, and he stuttered, and he was an anarchist. And I thought, God, I've gone out of the frying pan into the fire now, haven't I? And he pointed to this machine that I'd said I could work, an Arab printing machine. And he said, there's the sort of Arab, you see. And I looked at it, and he said, you can't work the buggy thing, can you? I said, no. And he said, I'll bloody well to teach you. And he was marvellous, and he taught me, and he did everything, and he was a wonderful friend all through my life. I was interested, but not in politics, but how it came about was, yeah, I can tell you how it was. Before you were 16, you weren't allowed to join a trade union. I don't know what the law was, but the trade unions couldn't take you into membership until you were 16. So I was an apprentice in the printing trade, but I couldn't belong to the union. And even when you belong to a union, if you're an apprentice, you can't go on strike. There were all sorts of rules. So anyway, it was the 1st of May 1935, I was 16 years old. So I joined the union immediately, but we weren't recognised in the firm. We had to keep quiet about it, otherwise we'd get the sack. And we only told the boss when we were all in it, then he couldn't sack the lot. It was as bad as that, yeah. And he was furious when it had happened, but once it's happened, you can't. We had him by the balls, well and truly, because if he dared to do anything to one of us, the lot shut down. And with football coupons and things that were dated, they daren't do it. Anyway, that's what happened. That's how I joined at first. And I also joined the Labour Party because I thought, trade unions, Labour and so on. And I went to a meeting of the Labour Party, and I was so disillusioned that it was so apolitical. It didn't seem to be grasping and doing anything. Because Bournemouth, although it sounds a posh place, and it had about 12 millionaires there, it also was a place where it had employment that qualified it to be a listed place for help and so on, because of the poverty that there was there at the same time. And that said to me, that's all wrong. Well, after 3 days in the Labour Party, that's when I went. Somebody said something about the Communist Party, and to go to the meeting in Boscombe at this hall. And that's when I went there and found all these meetings listed, and the most improbable one looked to be the spiritualist one, you see. And I went, and that's what it was. They couldn't get the room in the name of the Communist Party, but they could if they called themselves a Spiritist Union or something like that. There we are. And that's how I came into it. And of course, once you're in it, all the things happen. You meet people and you discover that they're good people. And at that time, there was the Spanish Civil War. There was all the, anti-fascist things that were going on. And the Communist Party was quite good pre-war. And we had some good leaders.
What sort of things was the Communist Party doing? Not that so. What did the Communist Party do? Did they do?
They were mainly concerned in trying to organise a popular front in Britain to get rid of the Tories, Labour, Communist. And to a certain extent the Popular Front was developing, because there wasn't much chance of Labour winning on its own, or Liberal winning on its own, or Communists winning on their own. But the Popular Front, like it did in France, might have won, because it would be an amalgamation of people with common thought, and you had to sort of, accept the limitations that it would have given, and that was the state of politics then. And
about the Spanish Civil War, was that?
Well, the Spanish Civil War.
Was it happening already when you joined the Spanish Civil War?
That started in 1936, about a year later, and the fascists were strong in Bournemouth. They used to parade in Boscombe outside what was the gas company, and they wear their black shirts, and they were physically dominant in politics. And we went to try and disrupt one of their meetings, and they were very strongly stewarded to prevent any interruptions and so on. And it was interesting to see the way they organised and ran their meeting. They had music in the beginning, to give it a sense. And then when Mosley and they came in wearing black shirts and marched into the hall, so it dominated the whole thing.
Like a political theatre, was it?
It did, and also, at that time, the Conservative Party, lots and lots were pro-German, and there was the link, and it's not been disclosed. Well, it was disclosed to a certain extent, but there were after Dunkirk, if Hitler had come, there was a fair selection of people. They would have stuck into government that were already there, And when people talk about, traitors and so on, you just think the only person that was ever shot as a traitor was a Tory, wasn't it? It was Amory, who broadcast with the Italians.
And not Lord Haw-Haw.
No, Lord Haw-Haw, he got away with it, I think.
No, they hanged him at the end of the war. They hanged him at the end of the war.
Did they? Oh, well, perhaps it was him as well. Oh, yes, I think they did. That's right. Yeah. Because Wicker talks about, he was the one who arrested him, because he'd been caught by the partisans. And he willingly gave himself up to Wicker to save himself from the partisans. I think that's it, yes. Yes, that's right. Yeah, but Amory was one of them. But anyway, that was it. But
so both Mum and her sister Eileen joined the Communist Party as well?
And John, Eileen's husband, was in as well.
But do you know when they joined? Would it have been the same time that you joined the Communist Party?
I would imagine so, yeah, we're all at the same time. I don't know whether it was sooner or later than that.
But Dennis didn't join the Communist Party, or did he? Or was he sympathetic?
Buggered if I know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure precisely about Dennis. Dennis used to, and Caroline, they always used to take a rather superior intellectual view of whatever you were doing, And they wouldn't get down to brass tacks and say, if you're for us, you're for us, and if you're against us, you're against us. That's all there is to it, They would find that to discuss it would be more like Dennis, yes. And Caroline was the same in a way. And they always thought they were that much cleverer than everybody else, Eileen.
I don't know if Eileen joined first or Mum joined at the same time. Or was it Eileen?
No, Mum. I don't know how Mum came about it. She was secretary to the district secretary in the West of England Communist Party to Harry Bourne.
That's after the war?
After the war, yes. And she was in Bristol during the war, and I don't know what happened with politics during the war because I wasn't in England. But she was very strong. You didn't like Caroline. Not Caroline, you didn't like, what was her sister's name? Eileen.
Eileen, no.
no, because she wouldn't give you a Mars bar.
She was a teacher, I think. Tell me about the Communist Party in the 30s then. What was it like to be in the party then? Did they let you join straight away? Did you join the YCL or the Communist Party?
Well, no, I thought about that a lot, but I discovered that if I'd joined the YSL, I'd probably have been the only one in it. So, so they thought it simpler to put me straight in the Communist Party. And I went on demonstrations. We used to go to demonstrations to London, supporting Spain, calling for food for Spain and arms for Spain, and things like that. And terrific demonstrations of support for Spain.
And who would be supporting those demonstrations?
Trade unions, Labour Party. Labour Party supported the Spanish Republicans very strongly, because Roderick Morgan, only about 10 days or 15 days ago, he mentioned that it was 60 years ago. He said, lads from the valleys were going off to Spain to join the Spanish Republican Army, and some other anniversary. You marked on the anniversary of it. So, I mean, it's well remembered. And in Oldham Labour Party, there was a memorial to lads from Oldham who had gone to Spain and were killed. Oh no, it wasn't just the communists who went in it.
And were you thinking you were going to Spain?
I tried to go, but they wouldn't have me because they said I was too young. And I didn't get there, you know. But I'm glad I didn't now, because it must have been a far more awful war than ours, actually. Because they didn't have the armaments or the backup that we had. Well, this division was a good one. We only got beaten once, and that was at Dunkirk. We never ever beaten again. And
so how about the two things, or the three things? There'd be unemployment, fascism, and the Spanish Civil War.
yeah.
Those were the three things the Communist Party was campaigning about.
Well, and also for houses and for all the other things, and work, and there was lots of things, you know, day-to-day things, like you know, support for people who were unemployed and poverty and so on, and trying to help people. They used to set up sort of organisations to buy food in bulk to sell cheaply to people to get round the costs of things. It was well organised and well run, the Communist Party, before the war.
What were the other parties like? What was the Tory Party?
Well, the Tory Party was dominant, and the MP we had in Bournemouth was Sir Henry Page Croft, and he used to spend most of his time out in the Middle East, you know, on holiday. He'd be absent for a year or two at a time, you know, so he didn't show much interest in anything at all. I don't know much about the Labour Party, except...
well, what sort of person would be a Tory then? What would their views be then?
I don't know much about them. I think...
wouldn't be as politically correct as they are now, would they?
No, far from it. They used to more or less paint the picture that the Labour movement didn't have the qualifications of government, education for government or things like that, and that they wouldn't be able to govern well. And also in that period, remember, there were people like Lansbury who went to prison because they wouldn't cut the amount of money being paid to people who were living in hostel accommodation, because they had no homes, no employment or anything. And rather than cut, because the Tory government said they had to cut the money going to them, they didn't cut it, and they were sent to prison themselves. So the Labour movement had a tough time fighting against Tory rule as it was then. And then, of course, when there had been a Labour government in 1926, or 25, I'm not sure of the month of the year, but it hadn't succeeded, and Ramsay MacDonald had gone into coalition with the Tories, and you know, it broke down, and it took a long time to recover from that. But when...
So when did you join the Communist Party 3 days after the Labour Party?
Yeah, but...
In Bournemouth, yeah?
In Bournemouth,
It would
yeah.
be a funny Communist Party in Bournemouth as well, I think.
It was very active in Bournemouth. Even after the war, it was very active, and it was quite an active Communist Party.
So
but it wouldn't it be? Because there were lots in.
So what did the Communist Party do in Bournemouth in the 30s, and what campaign?
In the 30s, well, supporting Spain, and at that time there were an awful lot of Jewish hoteliers belonged to it as well, because they realised fascism and so on, and they went to communism because communism was positively anti-fascist at the time. Very much so. And there was a lot of middle-class people in it, not many workers. But the trade unions, when I joined the trade union, we had to not tell the employer we were in a trade union because he would have sacked us at the time. But then when we all belonged, we then told him, and then he couldn't sack us all.
So, and what did they do? What was the what did the Communist Party actually do in these campaigns?
Well, for Spain, well, for the campaigns were food for Spain, arms for Spain, milk for Spain, a campaign to help the children who were evacuated to England from Spain, to look after them, to support the International Brigade in Spain by whatever means we could, and take part in demonstrations for Spain. But at that time, it wasn't just the Communist Party, there was the Popular Front, and that was Liberals, Communist, and some Labour, left-wing Labour. But the Labour Party was leave things alone and they go away attitude. And they...
How about the unemployment? Was there
unemployment in Bournemouth? It was both. It had 12 millionaires and was also a depressed area, because it had over the sort of ratio of unemployment that qualified.
So I mean, you were in Unity Theatre. I mean, actually, it was about. Actually, we could do. I was quite interested. What did you do in Unity Theatre? You were helping. You weren't an actor, though, were you ever?
It was very. You had to be very, very good to get accepted to do acting in Unity. Although they were all amateurs, Michael Redgrave used to play the piano actually for the accompaniment and so on. And Bram Bootman, I always think he was well in because they let him play the king in the political pantomime. And the political pantomime was about the war, and about the pre-war, where Germany was pinching countries like Czechoslovakia and things like that. And they were the sort of the babes in the wood, you know, those. And each time anybody got picked off by the Germans, we had to come out of the cast. But Bram played the part of the king, and his sort of song, one of his songs was, "He was only a figurehead wearing a crown, and between you and me, it's getting me down," you know. And then there was some about people like political commentators, song about one of them, you know, and it was a very popular political pantomime and running very well. But at the time, it's the same time as Cable Street and all that, we used to have to guard Unity Theatre when it was closed and everything, against the fascists trying to damage it. And, you know, you couldn't rely on the police to support anything against the fascists. They were infiltrated by them in the police a lot. So there was all that. It was quite...
The fascist ideas went into the establishment, into the police, and into... Fascist ideas and fascist sympathies were into...
Well, yes, I suppose the police might not have gone in as fascists, but I think the fascist ideas appeal more to them, the discipline of it and order and against the awful trade unionists and socialists and Reds and so on. So, I think the police were easy recruits for the fascists, and they wouldn't sort of stop the fascists where they would stop the communists, you see. And it says a lot for the communists that they stood up to it and succeeded in doing what they did.
Were the Unity Theatre popular? I mean, were they,
Oh yes, throughout the labour movement.
So it
Very
was full
popular.
house, was it?
Well, often, yes. It went into decline after the war. Alfie Bass was one famous one in it. Compo in Last of the Summer Wine, he was there. And I knew them all quite well. And it was it was a nice organisation. And it was... But it wasn't all communist. The Communist Party was within it and discussed what was best to do and what it had to aim for, but it had to be agreed by everybody. But the Communist Party was strong enough to get its way when it wanted it. Socialists were a bit drippy, but still.
So how did you hear about how did you hear about Cable Street? And what happened?
Well, through the party. I was with Unity Theatre, and Bram and the others all belonged to branches of the party. We didn't have a unit. Oh, we did. We had a Unity Theatre branch through them, but I wasn't. I belonged to Bristol branch. Yeah.
And what did the party say, or what was the mobilisation about the Cable Street?
It was stop Mosley, I suppose. No passaran.
So actually, because we got to do it again. What they were going to march? Could you say what it was that they were going to do?
They were going to march through the Jewish part of London, through the predominantly working class Jewish part of London, and politically it was important that they be stopped and not allowed to. And at first they tried to get the police to ban it, which they could do. They could say it was against public interest or something like that, but they wouldn't. They refused. So then they said, well, let's have a big demonstration against it to stop it. And the Labour Party said, no, let's do nothing about it and it'll go away. Don't give them free publicity. Don't. They took that view, but the communist view dominated, and as I say, they didn't get through. It was stopped. And at the time, of course, it was.
So what do you went along? What do you remember from the day then that actually happened? What did you actually?
Well,
see?
it just crowds and crowds and crowds of people. I didn't see anything much except no room for anybody to march through because but they had barricades across the road, and if they've tried to get to the barricades to dismantle them to get the fascists through, they got a hail of bricks and stones and whatever, empty and full bottles, anything, whatever you could throw at the bastards.
And what were you saying about the police that were caught or something? Or?
Oh, yeah, they captured some, but they didn't know what to do with them. I mean, captured them, so they took their helmets off them and gave them cups of tea and told them to go home. But they couldn't get back to their own people, so it didn't matter. I think they were glad to go home, some of them. Well, what could you do with them? A bit early in the war to shoot them, wasn't it? Well, war hadn't started then.
So what was the feeling after Cable Street then? Was it
Well,
seen as a victory and things?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Well, the Daily Worker gave full publicity to everything, and that throughout the country. It encouraged people to stand up against them and stop the buggers.
What did the BBC and the national press say?
Well, they reported it fairly coldly, but the national press gave little publicity to it, you know, because they sort of kept it down. And also, there wasn't. The press tended not to campaign on civil issues or anything like that. Tended to show it.
But what was the press? Was the political colour of the press at the time?
Well, there was the Daily Herald was supposed to be the Labour Party, but it was very right-wing Labour and very establishment-minded. The most progressive paper was the News Chronicle Daily, which was supposed to be liberal, but it was very progressive, and that was strong in its support of the Spanish government in the Spanish Civil War. The Mirror had a good record, and then lots of the others. The Sketch was a very right-wing Tory, posh little tabloid. Telegraph was just almost as it is now, not changed much, very old-fashioned and Tory-minded, but nice sort of Tories, you know, if there are such things. And
the Mail?
Well, the Mail was pro-fascist and supported Mosley very strongly, and that. But you see, the Express was still shouting the odds about the Empire, you know, what a wonderful thing it was, you know, every bit painted red on the map, you know, sun never sets on it, and as the workers' wages never rise. But there it is. But it was the press. That was the sort of thing, you know.
Was the feeling that war was coming?
Definitely. I knew. Funny enough, I knew it was coming. Oh, must be 18 months or 2 years before, and I was called up in 1938 for the militia, and at the time I was going to college at the linotype machinery, and I didn't want to interrupt my time to do that, so somebody said, well, I suggested appealing, and they said, no, don't appeal. Put down to go in the Air Force. They take a hell of a time to call up, you see. And so I put down, yes, I'd go, but I wanted to go in the RAF, you see. Nothing happened, so nothing happened at all. And of course, and then on September the 3rd, of course, the war broke out. And I discovered that because I was in St John Ambulance Brigade and had signed papers to say I didn't mind being in the military hospital reserve, I discovered I was in the army. And I thought, God, I don't want to be in the army. So I went to Portsmouth to join the Navy, thinking that's the best way of keeping out the army, join the Navy. And there was about 400 or more others all thought the same.